when my phone rang at 3:07 a.m. I thought I was dreaming. It was one of those calls that slices through the dark, pulling you out of the deepest part of sleep, the kind where you wake up already confused, your heart racing before your mind even catches up. The screen glowed on my nightstand, casting a faint light across the room. My hands trembled before I even touched it. Because of the name flashing on the screen, Daniel. My son's name, the same name I hadn't seen light up my phone in 15 years. I just stared at it for a moment, frozen. The ringtone, that soft piano tune he used to set for himself when he was alive, kept playing, echoing like a ghost in the silence of my bedroom. I whispered to no one. No. This can't be real. My chest felt tight. I reached out, almost like my hand was moving on its own, and I answered. At first, there was nothing, no voice, just a faint static and then breathing. Slow, uneven breathing. I sat up, my heart thudding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Hello? I whispered. The breathing stopped, and then, just before the line went dead, a small voice, one that sounded so much like his, said, Mom? I dropped the phone. It hit the floor with a dull thud, and for a long time I just stared at it, my body refusing to move. Tears welled up before I could even understand why. Because my mind knew what my heart didn't want to believe. My son had been gone 15 years. Buried in the same cemetery where I still visited every Sunday. I couldn't breathe. My hands shook as I picked the phone back up. But when I looked at the call log, the name was gone. It didn't even show a missed call, just nothing. It was as if it never happened. For the rest of that night, I didn't sleep. I just sat there clutching my phone like it was some kind of lifeline to him, to my Daniel. I replayed the sound in my head again and again, the way he said, Mom. It wasn't possible. I told myself that. I said it over and over. It's a dream. It's just a dream, but the thing is, I hadn't dreamed about him in years, not once. Not since the night of the accident. The next morning, sunlight crept in through the thin curtains, golden and ordinary. But the world didn't feel ordinary anymore. The kettle hissed as I made my morning tea, and my fingers still shook when I poured the water. I tried to pretend everything was normal, like it hadn't happened. But every time my phone buzzed, I jumped. My neighbor, Mrs. Ellis, knocked on my door around 9. She's been like family since Daniel passed, always bringing me soup when I'm too tired to cook. Always talking too much about her garden just to fill the silence. You look pale. Mary, she said as soon as I opened the door. Did you sleep at all last night? I almost told her. I almost said, my son called me. But the words felt insane even in my own head. Instead, I forced a weak smile. Just couldn't sleep. Too much tea before bed. She frowned. That kind of concerned look people give you when they don't believe your excuse but don't want to push. You should rest, dear. You've been working too hard. Working? Yes, that was one way to describe it. Since retiring from the school district 2 years ago, I'd been spending my days volunteering at the community library, sorting through old donations, labeling shelves. It kept me busy. It kept me from thinking too much. But that morning, I couldn't focus on anything. Not the books, not the smell of old paper that usually comforted me. My thoughts kept drifting back to that call, that voice. By afternoon, I was sitting in the staff room staring at my phone again. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe someone hacked the number. Maybe it was a glitch in the system, some recycled SIM card using his old contact. But deep down, something else whispered. A quieter, older voice. What if it wasn't an accident? When I got home that evening, I opened the box I hadn't touched in years, the one that sat on the top shelf of my closet, wrapped in an old quilt. Daniel's things. Inside were the small pieces of him I'd kept. A worn-out baseball glove, a half-faded photo of us at the beach, and his phone. The same one he'd had the night he died. I held it like it was fragile glass. The screen was cracked, but his case, bright blue with a sticker of the college he'd wanted to attend, was still there. I pressed the power button out of habit, even though I knew it hadn't worked in years. But to my shock, the screen flickered. Just for a second. Long enough for me to see something strange, a missed call. From my number, the date was that same morning. Throw 7 a.m. My knees gave out and I had to sit down right there on the floor. My throat felt tight. My hands went cold. I don't know how long I stayed like that, staring at the dead phone that somehow had recorded a call it couldn't possibly have received. All I knew was this. Something had happened. Something I couldn't explain, and for the first time in 15 years, I felt Daniel again. Not as a memory, not as grief, but as presence, and that terrified me more than anything. For the next few days, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Grief does strange things to the mind, especially the kind that lingers, the kind that becomes a quiet companion you learn to live with. After 15 years, I thought I'd made peace with mine. But grief? It never really goes away. It just hides in the small spaces of your life, waiting for a moment to breathe again. My life had become simple, almost painfully so. Every morning, I woke at 6. I'd boil water for tea, open the kitchen window, and listen to the city start to move. The garbage truck rumbling down the street, the early joggers' shoes tapping against the pavement, the faint laughter of children waiting for the school bus. I lived alone in a small 2-bedroom house on the edge of town. The walls were pale yellow, the color Daniel had picked when we first moved in. "It looks like sunshine," he'd said. I'd kept it that way ever since. My son had been my whole world. A quiet boy with kind eyes and a stubborn streak. He loved drawing, superheroes mostly. And he'd spend hours sprawled on the living room rug, lost in his sketches. Sometimes I still find bits of old pencil shavings stuck between the floorboards. I never sweep them away. After he passed, I filled the silence with small routines. Sunday visits to the cemetery, Wednesday coffee with Mrs. Ellis, Friday volunteer shifts at the library. It wasn't a bad life, just smaller than it used to be. But ever since that night, that call, the rhythm had changed. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The faint hum of the old refrigerator at night. The way the clock in the hallway sometimes stopped and then started again on its own. The smell of Daniel's old cologne, a crisp, woody scent, drifting through the hallway even though I hadn't opened his closet in years. I kept telling myself it was memory. Nostalgia. Nothing more. But then small things began to happen. One morning, when I went to water the plants in the living room, I found one of Daniel's sketchbooks sitting open on the coffee table. I hadn't seen it in years. I stood there for a long time just staring at it. The drawing on the open page was one he'd done when he was 10. It was of the two of us, stick figures with big smiles, holding hands under a bright sun. He'd written in his crooked handwriting, "Me and Mom forever." I sat down and cried for the first time in months. Later that afternoon, when I called Mrs. Ellis to check in, she noticed it in my voice right away. "Mary, are you sure you're all right? You sound far away." "I'm fine," I said quickly. Too quickly. "Just tired, that's all," she paused. "You've been visiting the cemetery more lately, haven't you?" I hesitated. "Maybe," Mrs. Ellis sighed. "You know, dear, sometimes holding on too tightly doesn't bring them closer. It keeps them from resting." I didn't respond. Because how do you tell someone that you don't feel like you're the one holding on? That it feels like he's reaching out instead? That evening, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The air was crisp, the sky painted in deep orange as the sun dipped behind the rooftops. I walked past the old park where Daniel used to play. The swings squeaked in the wind, and for a split second I could almost see him there, his legs kicking out, laughing, calling out, "Mom, watch me go higher." I blinked and the vision was gone. Just an empty swing, moving on its own in the breeze. When I got home, I made dinner, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and peas. The same meal Daniel always asked for on his birthdays. I didn't even realize what I was doing until I set the plate down at the table and caught myself setting out a second fork. I froze. The other chair sat there, empty. But for a moment, it didn't feel empty. A soft chill passed through the room, and I swear, I heard a faint sound. Like someone humming. A familiar tune. Daniel used to hum when he was drawing, always the same song. You Are My Sunshine. I turned off the lights, left the kitchen, and locked myself in my room that night. The next morning, I decided I needed to see someone. Not a doctor, not yet, but maybe Pastor Jim from church. He'd known Daniel since he was a little boy, and he was the only person I trusted with things that didn't make sense. I sat across from him in his office, the smell of old wood polish and coffee filling the air. "Mary," he said gently, folding his hands. "What's troubling you?" I hesitated. I didn't want him to think I'd lost my mind. But when I finally spoke, my voice cracked. "Pastor, my son called me." He blinked, surprised. "I beg your pardon?" "From his number," I said, my hands shaking. "At 3 a.m. I heard his voice. He said, 'Mom.'" For a moment, the room was silent. Then Pastor Jim leaned forward. "Mary, have you been sleeping well?" I wanted to be angry, but I couldn't be. He meant well. "I'm not imagining this," I said quietly. "Something is happening. I don't know what it means, but I feel like he's trying to tell me something." He nodded slowly. "Mary, grief can echo. Sometimes, when the heart hasn't fully healed, it can make us hear what we most want to hear." I looked away, staring out the window where sunlight filtered through the churchyard trees. "But what if it's not my heart, Pastor? What if it's real?" He sighed, his voice kind but firm. "Then you pray, my dear. You ask for peace, not answers. Peace." That word stayed with me long after I left, because peace was the one thing I hadn't felt since that call. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Daniel's old phone in front of me. The screen was black again, lifeless. But I couldn't shake the image of that missed call, from my number, and somewhere deep inside, a thought began to form. If the call wasn't from him, then who, or what, was trying to reach me through his number? The following week, the house began to feel different, not haunted. No, not like that, but unsettled. Like a place holding its breath. I tried to ignore it at first. I told myself I was imagining things, that my mind was creating shadows out of air. But there were moments when the world didn't move the way it used to. Small, quiet disturbances that made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't felt since Daniel's death. It started with the photo. There's a framed picture of Daniel on the mantel, the one taken on his high school graduation day. He's grinning, his arms slung around my shoulder, the sunlight catching the edges of his hair. I dust it every Sunday. It never moves. But that Monday morning, when I walked into the living room, it was turned face down. I froze. The air in the house felt thick, heavy, like before a storm. I picked it up carefully, my fingers trembling, and placed it upright again. But I couldn't stop looking at the faint smear of dust where it had slid, proof that someone, or something, had moved it. I whispered to the empty room, "Daniel, if you're here, please, just give me a sign that it's you." Of course, there was nothing, only silence. But later that night, I heard something. A sound coming from Daniel's old room. A low thud. I hesitated outside his door, my hand hovering over the knob. The air smelled faintly of pine, his old aftershave, and for a second, I was back in time. Back when he was alive, when I'd stand in that same doorway, telling him to turn off his music and go to bed. I opened the door slowly. Nothing. Just the room exactly as I'd left it all those years ago. Bed neatly made, desk covered in dust, his old sketchbook stacked in the corner. And yet one of them, the top one, was open. My breath caught. I stepped closer. It wasn't open to one of his old superhero drawings. It was open to a blank page. Except, faintly pressed into the paper, as if someone had traced over it with their fingertip, were 2 words: find me. I stumbled back. My vision blurred for a second. I touched the page. The indentations were real. Not written in pen, but pressed into the paper. I felt sick. Was this some kind of cruel prank? But who would do something like that? No one came into this house except Mrs. Ellis, and she'd never. The next morning, I called my phone service provider. I asked them about the call from Daniel's number, whether there was any record of it. The man on the line was polite, but confused. "Ma'am, there's no record of an incoming or outgoing call from that number at 307A. My voice trembled. "Are you sure? It rang. I heard it." "I'm looking at the logs right now," he said. "There's nothing at that time. The last call to or from your number was 2 days before that." He paused. "Are you saying the number belongs to someone else now?" "It belonged to my son," I said softly. "He's gone." The man was silent for a moment. Then, carefully, he said, "That number's not active anymore, ma'am. It's been deactivated for over a decade." I hung up, my stomach churning. I stared at the phone on my counter. The same phone that had shown Daniel calling that night. How could a dead, deactivated number make a call? By that evening, I was spiraling. I sat on the edge of my bed, Daniel's old phone beside me, the house too quiet around me. And then, as if the world wanted to mock my fear, it happened again. A vibration. His phone lit up. My heart nearly stopped. But this time, it wasn't a call. It was a message notification. From a number I didn't recognize. A long string of digits. The kind that looks almost foreign. I picked it up, my fingers shaking. The message read, "You left something behind." I stared at it, my breath shallow. I wanted to throw the phone, to run, to scream. But instead, I did something else. I typed back. "Who is this?" The typing dots appeared. Then a single reply. "You know where." And then silence. The screen went dark again, leaving me staring at my reflection in the black glass. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about those words. You left something behind. What did that mean? Something from Daniel's life? Something from that night? I went back into his room, searching through drawers, boxes, anything that might make sense. The smell of old paper and dust filled the air. I opened his desk drawer and found a small key, silver, with a faded blue tag. I'd never seen it before. Attached was a tiny note, brittle with age. Just one word, written in Daniel's handwriting. Locker. My heart pounded. When Daniel was alive, he used to go to the old community gym near the high school. He had a locker there. Could that be it? I stared at the key in my hand, the metal cool against my skin. My mind told me I was being foolish, chasing ghosts. But something deeper inside, something that sounded like a mother's instinct, whispered that this was the clue I wasn't meant to ignore. Maybe this wasn't about spirits or ghosts. Maybe this was about truth. Something left unsaid, unfinished. And I realized, with a chill running through me, maybe Daniel's story hadn't ended the night I thought it had. The next morning, I woke up with that small silver key still clutched in my hand. I hadn't realized I'd fallen asleep holding it. The tag, worn, nearly translucent from age, was still faintly marked with Daniel's handwriting. Locker. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of direction. Terrifying, yes, but clear. I made myself a cup of tea, though I didn't drink it. My stomach was too tight. Every sound in the house felt sharper than usual. The creak of the floorboards, the whistle of the kettle, even the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. At 10, I grabbed my coat, slipped the key into my pocket, and drove to the old community gym. The parking lot was mostly empty, the building itself aged and tired. with chipped paint and a faded sign that still read, Evergreen Fitness. It had been here since before Daniel was born. When I stepped inside, the air hit me, that familiar smell of old metal, sweat, and disinfectant. The same smell that used to cling to Daniel's clothes when he came home after basketball practice. I hadn't been here in 15 years. The woman at the front desk looked up, smiling politely. "Morning. You looking for a membership?" I shook my head. "No, dear. I'm looking for something that might still be here. My son used to have a locker here years ago. I was hoping—" Her brow furrowed slightly. "Do you know which one?" I showed her the key. The tag was faded, but the number 118 was still visible. She frowned. "We changed most of the locks years back, but some of the old ones in the corner room might still be the same." "Let me grab the manager." A few minutes later, a middle-aged man in a tracksuit came out. "I hear you're looking for an old locker?" I nodded. "My son used to come here before he passed. I found this key, and I need to see what's inside." He looked at me for a long moment, then his expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am. If the key still fits, you're welcome to check." The locker room was empty, echoing faintly with the hum of the vents. I walked slowly, my shoes tapping softly against the tile. The metal lockers stretched in long rows, the paint peeling, numbers fading. When I reached 118, I stood there for a long moment before sliding the key in. It turned easily. I hesitated, almost afraid of what I'd find. Then I pulled the door open. Inside was a small old gym bag. Dusty, but undisturbed. My breath hitched as I pulled it out and unzipped it. Inside were a few of Daniel's things: his basketball shoes, a water bottle, and a folded piece of paper tucked into a side pocket. I unfolded it carefully. It was a letter. My hands began to shake before I even read the first line. "Mom, if you're reading this, then something's gone wrong." The world tilted. My knees nearly gave out. I sat down on the bench, the letter trembling in my hands. "I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want to worry you. But I think someone's been following me. It started a few weeks ago. Strange calls, someone waiting outside the gym after practice. I told Coach, but he said I was overthinking it." I swallowed hard. My eyes blurred. "Last night I found a note in my backpack. It said, 'You shouldn't have seen what you saw.' I don't know what they mean. Maybe it's a prank. But I don't feel safe. If anything happens to me, please tell Officer Reeves. He knows about what happened behind the school." The rest of the letter was smudged, as if his hands had been shaking when he wrote it. I sat there in silence, my heart pounding so loudly it felt like thunder in my chest. Daniel hadn't just died in an accident. He'd been afraid. He'd been followed. And someone out there, knew exactly what happened to him. I drove home in a daze. My mind kept replaying his words. "You shouldn't have seen what you saw." All these years I'd believed what they told me, that Daniel had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, that the hit and run had been random, that they'd never found the driver. But what if it wasn't random? What if Daniel had known something worth killing for? When I got home, I placed the letter on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. I could still see the faint marks of his handwriting, still smell the faint trace of gym powder and old paper. Then I picked up the phone. "Riverside Police Department," the voice on the other end said. I cleared my throat. "I need to speak with an Officer Reeves. It's regarding a case from 15 years ago. My son, Daniel Parker." There was a pause. "One moment, ma'am." A few seconds later, a tired, gravelly voice came on. "Reeves speaking." "Officer Reeves," I said, trying to steady my voice. "You may not remember me. I'm Mary Parker, Daniel's mother." There was a brief silence. Then, "Mrs. Parker." "Yes, I remember. I'm sorry, it's been a long time. What's this about?" "I found something," I said, my voice breaking. "A letter. From Daniel. He said you knew about what happened behind the school." Silence. When Reeves finally spoke, his tone had changed. "Mrs. Parker, where did you find that letter?" "In his locker," I whispered. Another long pause. Then he said, "Listen to me carefully. Don't tell anyone else about that letter. I'll come to you tonight. We need to talk." My pulse raced. What do you mean? What's going on? But he didn't answer that. He only said one thing before hanging up. Some things from back then were never meant to resurface. That night I sat in my kitchen waiting for him. The clock ticked past 8, then 9, but he never came. Instead, at 9:47 p.m., I received another message, this time on my phone, from an unknown number. It said, "Stop digging, Mary. You'll regret it." I don't think I truly understood fear until that night. It wasn't the kind of fear that makes you scream. It was the kind that seeps into your bones, silent, cold, paralyzing. I sat there at my kitchen table, staring at the message glowing on my phone screen. "Stop digging. Mary, you'll regret it." There was no name, no number, just the words, sharp and deliberate. My fingers hovered over the phone for a long time before I finally typed back, "Who is this?" No reply. I waited 5 minutes, then 10. Then I turned off the lights and peered through the window blinds, half expecting to see someone standing outside. But the street was empty. Just the dim glow of the lamppost, the wind rustling through the maple trees. I locked every door in the house, drew the curtains, and sat down on the couch with my phone clutched tight. For 15 years, I'd lived with grief. But now, it felt like grief was giving way to something else, purpose. Daniel hadn't died in an accident. He'd been silenced, and whoever had done it didn't want me to know the truth. The next morning, I went to the police station. Officer Reeves hadn't shown up, and I needed answers. The young woman at the reception desk looked up as I approached. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "Yes, I need to see Officer Reeves. He was supposed to meet me last night." She frowned, typing something on her computer. "Reeves? Are you sure about the name?" "Yes, Detective Mark Reeves. He worked Daniel Parker's case 15 years ago." Her brow furrowed deeper. "Ma'am, Detective Reeves retired in 2015. He passed away 2 years ago." My stomach dropped. "That's impossible. I spoke to him yesterday." She gave me that cautious look people give when they think you're confused. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but that's not possible." I stepped back slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. "No." I heard his voice. I left before she could say anything else. The moment I got to my car, I felt the world tilt again. The call from his number. The messages. The letter. And now this. Was I losing my mind? Or was someone playing with me, using everything connected to Daniel to break me down? Either way, I wasn't stopping. That afternoon, I drove back to the school, Daniel's old high school. The place hadn't changed much. The paint was peeling on the front gates, and the football field grass was still uneven. I parked by the curb and just sat there, looking at it through the windshield. The memories flooded back, Daniel laughing with his friends, waving at me before getting into his coach's car, the last time I ever saw him alive. Behind the school, near the gym, there was a service alley. The letter had mentioned what happened behind the school. I walked down that alley, my shoes crunching over gravel. There was a chain-link fence, rusted and bent in places. Beyond it, an old maintenance shed. The door was unlocked. Inside, it smelled of oil and damp wood. A few old sports banners hung from nails, and a cracked trophy case leaned against the wall. I turned on my phone's flashlight and scanned the room. At first, nothing. Then, in the far corner, something caught the light. A faint glimmer. I crouched down. It was a metal badge. Rusted but still legible. Riverside Police. And next to it, an old flip phone, half buried under a dusty tarp. I picked it up, my hands trembling. It was identical to the phone Daniel had when he died. But this one wasn't his. The screen was different, the case plain black. I pressed the power button. It flickered, then came to life, barely. The battery icon blinked red, almost dead. There was one saved message. I opened it. From unknown number, meet behind the gym. Bring the photos. Don't tell anyone. The timestamp, the night Daniel died, the same night of the supposed accident. My throat went dry. I didn't know what photos they meant, but whoever sent that message had lured Daniel to that spot. And now, 15 years later, someone was trying to make sure I never found out who. When I got home, I pulled out the letter again, rereading every word. You shouldn't have seen what you saw. Was it about the photos? Had Daniel captured something incriminating? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I needed to find those photos, but where would he have hidden them? My gaze drifted to the shelf in the hallway where Daniel's old camera still sat. A bulky Canon, scratched and dusty. I hadn't touched it since the funeral. I picked it up, flipped open the back, and slid out the memory card. My laptop was slow, the screen cracked in the corner, but it still worked. I inserted the card. Dozens of pictures appeared. Sunsets, his friends, his sketches, random shots of our old cat. And then, a folder buried deep in the file list. One I'd never noticed before. Private! I opened it. There were only 3 photos, all taken the same night. The first showed a group of men standing in the alley behind the school, one of them wearing a Riverside police uniform. The second, Daniel's coach, holding a duffel bag. Money spilling out, and the third, my hand flew to my mouth. It showed Officer Reeves, standing beside the coach. Shaking his hand, I sat there, frozen, tears spilling down my face. Daniel had uncovered something, corruption, bribery, maybe even something darker. And the people he thought he could trust, the people meant to protect him, had been part of it. That's why they called it an accident. That's why no one was ever arrested. And now, 15 years later, someone was watching me, afraid that I'd uncover what Daniel had died for. I printed the photos, locked them in my desk drawer, and sat by the window for the rest of the night, clutching the letter to my chest. Grief had kept me silent for 15 years. But love was going to make me dangerous. By morning, my hands still trembled from the discovery. The weight of those 3 photos was unbearable, not just because of what they showed, but what they meant. Daniel had died trying to tell the truth, and the men who buried that truth had lived their lives untouched. Not anymore. I spent hours making copies, digital and printed. I didn't know who to trust, so I spread them like seeds of a dangerous truth. One said in a safe deposit box, another emailed to myself from a new anonymous account. I even mailed an envelope to a reporter I remembered from years ago, someone who had covered Daniel's case with sympathy before the story was swept under the rug. I wasn't naive. I knew what I was doing could make me a target. But the fear that once paralyzed me was gone, replaced by something sharper, purpose. That afternoon, I drove to the old cemetery where Daniel was buried. The sky was gray, the air heavy with rain. I stood over his grave, holding the photos in my hand, my voice trembling. Danny, I found it, I whispered. I know what they did. I know why you never came home. A gust of wind swept through, rustling the leaves. For a second, I almost felt him there, like the world was acknowledging the truth. Then my phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown. Number. You shouldn't have done that. Another followed instantly. It's too late to stop now. I looked around the cemetery, heart pounding. The parking lot was empty. The trees loomed like silent witnesses. Then I noticed a black SUV idling at the far end of the road. Tinted windows. No plates. They were watching me. That night, everything happened fast. Around 10 p.m., I heard tires on gravel outside my house. Then, headlights. My phone started buzzing again, this time nonstop. Calls, messages, all from unknown numbers. I peeked through the curtain. The SUV was there. I grabbed the drawer key and stuffed the photos into my jacket pocket. My breathing was shallow. My instincts screamed, "Run," before I could move. The doorbell rang 1, 2, 3 times. Then, silence. A low male voice called through the door. "Mrs. Parker, we just want to talk." I didn't answer. "Please open up. You're making things harder for yourself." The way he said it, calm, rehearsed, sent chills down my spine. I backed away from the door and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. As the line rang, the sound of shattering glass echoed from the back of the house. They were coming in. I bolted out the side door, clutching my phone and the photos. My neighbor's porch light flickered ahead. Mrs. Green, the sweet woman who'd always watched over my house when I was away. I sprinted across the lawn, my breath visible in the cold air. I could hear footsteps behind me. Heavy, deliberate. "Stop!" one of them shouted. I didn't. Mrs. Green opened her door just as I reached it. "Mary, what's going—" "Call the police," I gasped, pushing inside. "They broke in there—" Before I could finish, flashing blue and red lights filled the street. The sirens were deafening. I fell to my knees, sobbing, clutching the photos like they were the only thing keeping me alive. The men were gone by the time the officers entered my house. The back window shattered, the kitchen trashed. But the strange part? They hadn't taken anything. Not the computer. Not the jewelry. Just my old photo albums. The ones from Daniel's childhood. It was personal. When I told the police about the SUV and the photos, they looked skeptical, though one younger officer seemed to take notes seriously. "Ma'am," he said gently, "do you still have proof of what you found?" I nodded, handing him one printed photo. "There's more. I've made copies. They'll be sent to the press if anything happens to me." His eyes flicked up to mine, a quiet understanding passing between us. "Then let's make sure nothing does." 2 days later, the photos went public. The journalist I'd contacted published everything: Daniel's story, the cover-up. The evidence tying both the coach and Detective Reeves to the corruption ring. The town exploded, headlines everywhere. Teen's death linked to police corruption scandal. Mother's 15-year search exposes hidden crimes. The mayor called for a full investigation. The police chief resigned. The coach was arrested trying to cross the state line. Even the late Detective Reeves' files were reopened, revealing years of suspicious case closures. The truth Daniel had died for was finally out, and suddenly, everyone remembered his name again. That night, I sat by the window, the same one where I'd waited for his calls for years. The house was quiet, the chaos of the past week slowly fading into stillness. My phone buzzed one last time. An unknown number. My heart stopped. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" There was a long silence, just static and faint breathing, then a voice. Soft, familiar. "Mom." It was Daniel's voice, clear, gentle. "Thank you." And then, the line went dead. I sat there, tears streaming down my face. No fear, no confusion, just peace. For the first time in 15 years, I felt him let go. And maybe, in that moment, I finally did too. After the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. Not the kind of silence that suffocates, the kind that settles. The rain had stopped. The ticking of the old clock in the hallway echoed like a heartbeat. For years, I had begged for one last moment with my son. A sign, a dream, anything. But when it finally came, it wasn't through grief or fear. It was through peace, through truth. The next morning, sunlight streamed into the kitchen, warm, golden, alive. I brewed a pot of coffee and just stood there, watching the steam rise. The same kitchen that once held the smell of burnt toast and morning laughter now smelled of quiet forgiveness. When the story hit the national news, my phone rang for days. Reporters, advocates, even strangers who'd lost children wrote to me, telling me my story had given them courage to fight back too. One woman's message stuck with me. "You reminded me that silence protects no one. Thank you for speaking for all of us who still wait for justice." I didn't feel like a hero. I felt human again. The town began to shift. The police department opened a new review board. The families of other victims came forward. Daniel's name was cleared in the official record. His school even held a small memorial for him, 15 years late, but sincere. They planted a tree by the old football field. a maple just like the one he used to climb behind our house. When I stood there during the ceremony, watching the leaves rustle in the wind, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. One of Daniel's old friends, now grown with a family of his own, came up to me. His voice was gentle when he said, "He'd be proud of you, Mrs. Parker. You did what none of us could." I smiled, tears in my eyes. "No," I said softly. "I just did what any mother would do. I loved him enough to never stop looking. The house doesn't feel haunted anymore. It feels lived in." Sometimes late at night I still glance at my phone, half expecting that number to light up again. But it never does. And that's okay. Because that final thank you wasn't meant to start something new. It was meant to end what was unfinished. I've kept the photos locked away, not because I want to forget, but because they've served their purpose. The truth is out there now, where it belongs. I've started volunteering at a local support group, parents who've lost children to violence or negligence. When I sit with them, I listen more than I speak. Because sometimes that's all people need, to be heard. To not feel crazy for still missing someone 15 years later. There's one young mother, about my son's age when he passed. Every week she asks, "How did you know when it was time to let go?" And I always tell her the same thing. You don't let go all at once. You just stop holding on to the pain. Last night I dreamt of Daniel. Not the broken, frightened boy I lost, but the boy I used to chase through the garden with muddy shoes and laughter. He stood by the maple tree, sunlight filtering through the branches, smiling that quiet, mischievous smile that always got him in trouble. He didn't say anything this time. He just nodded, and I knew he was okay. When I woke up, my pillow was damp with tears. But they weren't from grief. They were from gratitude that I had been his mother. That love, no matter how scarred or silenced, had still found its way home. These days, my nights are peaceful again. I leave the phone on my nightstand, not because I'm waiting for it to ring, but because I know it won't. And that feels right. Sometimes I sit on the porch and watch the neighborhood kids play, their laughter echoing through the dusk. One of them looks so much like Daniel did at 10. Same stubborn cowlick, same wide grin. His mother waves to me from across the street, and for a brief moment, I feel the circle of life turning. How love never really leaves. It just changes shape. The last thing I did before closing that chapter was something small but sacred. I took Daniel's old phone, the one that had somehow called me that night, and placed it inside a wooden box with a note. On the note, I wrote, "This phone once carried a mother's last message from her son. If love could travel through time, it would sound like this." I buried it beneath the maple tree in our yard, the one that had grown tall and strong despite the storms, because that's what love does. It grows, even after everything else has fallen apart. I don't know if what happened that night was meant to be a mystery or a miracle. Maybe it was both. But I do know this. The past has a way of finding peace once the truth is set free, and when it finally does, so do we. Soft pause. If you've listened this far, thank you. Maybe you've lost someone too. Maybe there's a voice you still wait to hear, a truth you still can't make peace with. But take it from a mother who spent 15 years searching through silence. The truth doesn't always arrive when you want it to. Sometimes it comes when you're finally ready to listen. You know, for the longest time, I thought grief was something you survived once. Like a storm, it hits, it passes, and you move on. But grief isn't a single storm. It's the weather that follows you. Some days are sunny and kind, and others, you wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of thunder that only you can hear. That night, when my son's number called me after 15 years of silence, I thought I was losing my mind. I thought grief had finally swallowed me whole, but I was wrong. What I heard that night wasn't madness. It was memory. It was love, refusing to disappear, because love doesn't end where life does. It lingers, in old voicemails, in laughter that echoes in empty rooms, in photos that smell like dust and sunshine. It waits for you to be ready, to hear it again without breaking. I used to think justice was about punishment, about seeing the people who hurt us face what they deserve. But now I understand, real justice is truth, and truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it calls you at 3 a.m, just to tell you, "Thank you, Mom," and that whisper can heal you more than 1,000 apologies ever could. After everything, I don't think I'll ever stop missing Daniel. But I've learned that missing someone doesn't mean your life has to stop. It means their story still lives in you. It means you still have something left to do, to speak, to love, to forgive. Maybe that's why I keep telling my story. Because if even one person hears it and decides to keep living, to keep believing that love can outlast loss, then maybe my son's life, and even his silence, meant something more. Sometimes late at night, when the world feels too quiet, I still whisper goodnight into the dark. And though no phone rings back, no voice answers, I feel peace. Because I know now, he's not gone. He's just beyond the sound of it. If you've ever lost someone you love, I want you to remember this. You don't heal by forgetting. You heal by remembering, gently, slowly, without fear. You heal when you realize that grief is just another name for love that's looking for somewhere to go. So let it stay. Let it live in your laughter, in your kindness, in your strength. That's how they stay with you. Soft exhale. Would you have answered that call? If your child, your love, your lost one reached out after all those years, would you have picked up? And if you did, what would you say? Tell me in the comments. And if my story touched your heart, please subscribe and share it with someone who might need a little reminder that love never really leaves. Because sometimes, even after 15 years of silence, love still finds a way to call home.